Hello everyone, and my name is Oliver McEntyre and I'm the National Strategy Director for Barclays Agriculture. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about sustainability and the whole UK-wide agricultural industry's journey to net zero. Firstly, of course, a little bit about Barclays and Barclays Agriculture. We've been in banking for over 325 years, and we can actually trace our first agricultural deal right back to over 270 years ago, 1744. I feel quite sure there was some deals being done before that, but that's the furthest back we can trace. We've got a dedicated agricultural team across the UK, numbering about 130 relationship managers, and we really pride ourselves on being a true vertical operation in that everybody involved in agriculture, whether it's from the smallest upland farmer up to some of the biggest agri-food businesses in the UK, sits within the same team of relationship managers. We've got huge industry knowledge, huge experience, and we also have our managers with specific sector expertise. So we're going to talk a little bit about productivity. We've all seen this graph before. I tire of it a little because you can see we've got the US, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Germany, France, and the UK plotted on one graph, courtesy of the United States Department for Agriculture. I have a slight issue with this in that were we all at the same base level of 100 on the indices? Possibly not. Perhaps UK agriculture was just a little bit more productive in 1992 than some of those other sectors. What we do see, though, is we see very similar trends on each different line. So, we talk a lot about productivity and we talk a lot about efficiency in agriculture. I don't think UK agriculture and Scottish agriculture has huge differences with other parts of the world. There's also a slight proviso. You've only got to look at certain parts of the UK and Scotland especially to see that there's an awful lot of upland, an awful lot of moorland, which is no way going to be as productive as, say, parts of Netherlands, where I think it's 25-30% of the Netherlands agricultural area is actually under glass, which is a huge area, and it's always going to prove more productive. So losing patience a little bit with that graph, that's for sure. Here's some figures for the DEFRA Farm Business Survey. It is farms in England and Wales, but I think you can probably overlay this to any part of the UK. And we can see that, the darkest blue lines are profitability from agricultural income. Some of those sectors with the good thick margin on them would be the poultry sector, the dairy sector. Bit of a challenging year for pigs this on the pig markets. So usually the pig market dark blue bar is much bigger as well. Some of the challenges are in the cereal sector, quite a narrow blue bar there. Again, not great prices in this year that the survey reflects, but sometimes that graph doesn't get too much bigger even in a good year. And grazing livestock, as an average across the farms surveyed in the Farm Business Survey, as an average, they actually lose money from their agricultural activity. And I suppose when we start thinking about sustainability, the transition period, and what's coming down the line for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years in UK agriculture, is actually starting to look at some of the other bars on that chart as well as the agricultural income. We'll skip past diversified income initially. I think an awful lot of diversified businesses don't run as part of the farm business, so I don't think that's probably truly representative of what is actually happening out there on farm. But by far and away, the more interesting thing is the grey bar at the top of the graph. And the interesting factor on that is that that is a proportion of basic payment scheme, of subsidy coming into that business. And you can see there's some big chunks of money coming into some of those businesses. And that's the basic payment scheme we're going to see in varying degrees, in varying ways across the UK start to decline over the next 6 or 8 years. So that income is going to need replacing. Now, the sort of lighter grey box, I hope that's coming up on your screens okay. The lighter grey box is environmental income. And, we know through the land management schemes that are coming through and the push from sort of direct area payments, if you will, right through to public money for public good, paying for environmental habitat and benefit, those boxes have great potential to grow and grow and grow over the next 6, 7, 8 years. But they've got to grow in a way that that dark blue box of agricultural income also begins to grow with it. One of the challenges in agriculture, as no one will need me to tell you, is that return on capital employed in a business. You know, it's a tough and challenging market for many, many different types of farms. And again, this is DEFRA Farm Business Survey, but you can see, from 2012, 2013, there's been 1 year where we've blipped into a positive as an average across this particular farm group. Clearly, every individual farm business would have a different graph if we were to plot that. But it is a challenge, and we do need to understand that in order to be green, in order to be sustainable, in order to have access to the countryside and hit all the targets that are being set for us, we also need an agricultural industry that isn't in the red. You cannot be green if you are in the red. It's that simple. What are the other challenges coming in when we're thinking of sustainability and the change ahead? Well, any of you who haven't been on the Committee on Climate Change website, I would thoroughly recommend it. It's basically an independent think tank that feeds into government and policy. And you can see from the slide there are all sorts of ways along the bottom that they see reduction in carbon dioxide and carbon release, into the atmosphere, as well as greenhouse gases, methanes, things like that, and how they're going to sort of stop that. Now, that's just an idea at the minute, but it's very much the direction of travel we are in. And they've also done quite a good report, quite an in-depth report on the major shift that's going to be required in land management across the whole of the UK in order to deliver net zero emissions, which is basically where we're trying to head to, isn't it? Net zero and being left to farm in the way that we want to farm and farm our land and retain it. Now, this Kubler-Ross change curve was originally developed for grief, and some of the words are quite dramatic on it. Shock, frustration, depression, experiment. I think I would change some of those a little bit, but as you go through that curve like that and it starts to die down, you basically come into this sort of realization that change is ahead. Shock and denial, probably a bit too strong a word. We're not in denial and we're not in shock. We've seen it coming down the line to us. Probably a little bit of frustration there. There's certainly a need for more direction and more clarity on what we need to do as an industry. And depression, probably a little bit strong when it comes to the sort of change in business. But there are people, and I've had conversations, and I know at times maybe I have as well, where we felt a bit low about this challenge ahead to get to net zero. But there are also people out there who are on their way back up that graph. Experiment, probably I'd substitute experiment for probably I would substitute experiment for investigation, if I'm honest, starting to look at the options, starting to see what options are available for your farm. And then from that, you become decision making and integration. And the reason I put this up, and we will revisit it before I finish, the reason I put this up is from a business context, the longer you spend, and we'll use the headings on the slide, but the longer you spend in that sort of shock, denial, frustration, depression sort of area, the further behind you are everyone else who's into experimenting, investigating, making decisions and actually implementing them in their farm business. And that eventually could potentially put you at a slightly disadvantaged competitive edge. The one thing is for sure, with some differences across the devolved countries in the UK, but it is, think about the things you can influence. There are certain things that you cannot change. We can try and influence policy through the farming unions, through pressure groups, but actually there are certain things that we're just not going to be able to change. And it's about focusing on the things that you can influence. Now, whether that's about efficiency, whether that's animal welfare, whether that's environment, but you can actually influence that. And, there's a great quote there. Very often the outcome of a situation is not the scenario presented. That's just the situation. It's just the backdrop. It's actually the actions that an individual or an individual business take that will define the outcome. And that sort of goes back to that Kubler-Ross curve. The quicker you can get out of that dip and up the other side, then the better and swifter your business will respond. So, how's the industry feeling out there? Well, we've done some survey work across the whole of the UK. We spoke to 1,000 farmers. Over a quarter of those were based in Scotland. And we found that 8 out of 10 farmers, in fact, just over, do believe they can be carbon neutral by 2035, 10 years ahead of the Scottish Government's target. 1 in 5 believe they're already there. And obviously 2020 has been such a challenging year with the pandemic and the lockdowns and everything else. But 2/3 of the farmers we spoke to in Scotland felt that it had made them focus more on their business, act as a catalyst for how their business can be more resilient, more sustainable. I am getting to the point where I'm throwing quite a lot of figures out there, but hopefully they stay on screen long enough for you to digest them. A quarter of farmers surveyed in Scotland said they were going to improve their waste and slurry management, so better use of nutrients, perhaps less volatilisation, less release of carbon into the atmosphere, and ammonias and nitrates as well. 25% are planning on investigating agri-tech to see how they can become more efficient, and therefore what we do see when we're talking about efficiency, we talk about carbon loss. The really high levels of carbon loss are very often an indication of inefficient practices. Now, that doesn't matter whether it's transport, whether it's agriculture, whatever sector. So there are areas where we can focus to reduce our carbon footprint, and maybe technology. Certainly 1 in 4 farmers believe technology has a big part to play in that. Obviously, there's the standard trees, hedgerows, and things like that, but also renewable energy, solar power, maybe wind turbines, and everything else. I think they're going to come more back to the fore. And 2/3 of farmers revealed that sustainability combined with business efficiency was their farm's top priority at the moment, which is great news. It shows great positivity. So we also talk to a lot of consumers. We see a lot of consumer surveys in UK agriculture, and they what a consumer sometimes says on the way into a supermarket is not how they react when they're in it. However, what 2020 has done, I think it has actually made an awful lot of consumers really focus on that food chain. I genuinely never thought, living in the UK, I would ever go into a supermarket and find empty shelves and suddenly have my evening meal or my few meals for the few days ahead dictated by what I could get rather than what I wanted. So hopefully these thoughts and feelings will stay with the consumers in the UK. And nearly 50%, nearly half, are looking to purchase more seasonal produce, and in a view to not only sustainability but helping the sector become more carbon neutral. And 2/3 are trying to shop from local stores, farm shops, and they believe that that is much better for the environment, which clearly, when you're talking food miles from a farm shop, it clearly can be. 51% believe that purchasing from farm shops and local stores helps them better understand where their foods come from. Really endorse that, wouldn't we, those of us who've been in or have anything to do with a farm shop? And encouragingly, it is actually farmers planning to sell and process their food is over half UK farmers are planning on looking into that in the coming years. There's a few more slides to go at on the consumer survey. A little appreciating not as great as pictures, but some really interesting statistics there. So more than half of consumers across the UK and Scotland specifically, in this case, more than half would like to see a dedicated aisle for sustainably sourced foods. We see these aisles with freeform, and we see the aisles with sort of foods from around the world. I don't think it'll be that long before we start seeing a bit of a green aisle in there for food with a net zero carbon footprint. And 2/3 think that shoppers should have better information on how they can improve their carbon footprint. But here's the real win, in my view, for farmers and the food industry. On average, dangerous playing with averages in sample sizes, but on average in Scotland, people would pay £190 a year on top of their usual shopping basket for more sustainable produce. And when you start to multiply that up by the number of households in Scotland, that's actually quite a large amount of money running into the tens of millions that potentially could be available to the industry, and for those who want to sort of get themselves up that curve and increasingly become more and more sort of carbon neutral and have a net zero business as soon as possible. So we've got our transition period. We know our conclusions, and clearly I work for a bank, I represent a bank, so we need to come back to some conclusions. Huge changes on the subsidy and environmental payments. Labour can be a big issue, especially up that east coast of Scotland in the sort of top fruit, soft fruit sector. Management efficiency, employing technology to help with that in box 3, and benchmarking. Huge fan on benchmarking. Any business is a journey, whether it's a 1 month journey, a 1 year journey, or a generational journey. If you don't have goals and you don't measure them, how on earth are you ever going to know how you're getting on that journey? And that's not going to be just about business at the moment. We're looking endlessly at audit trails of how do you value natural capital, how do you measure it initially. So that benchmarking is going to start to come in even more, and probably spread away a little bit from the usual sort of litres per cow per year, tons per acre, gross margin, and other things that we're more used to looking at. The other influences coming in is Committee on Climate Change, which is an indication of the direction of travel. Target of net zero by 2045, the Scottish Government has set. We must remember when we're talking about that, agriculture is fairly unique. I racked my brains, and I can't seem to come up with another industry sector that, is an emitter. We're all emitters of carbon and greenhouse gases. Even me sitting here talking down a video camera to you, I'm emitting carbon. But agriculture is really lucky because it's probably one of the very few industries that actually, whilst it emits, it also has the ability to sequestrate not only carbon, but also other greenhouse gases back into soil, into plants, into crops, into trees, into hedgerows. So we are in a great position to hit that net zero target. Box 5, public opinion, kind of ties into net zero, climate change, sustainability. We've already seen on our survey that 50% of the consumers in the UK want to be more green, and they want to be more sustainable, and they want to shop more sustainably. But bringing it back to reality, some might say with a bump to the ground, cash is always going to be king. We need to, I've touched on it already with the farm business survey graphs. We need to remember farm businesses need to be efficient. They need to be able to generate profit. That's down to farmers. It's down to the support industry, to consultants, to banks, to ensure that farmers have the right tools, the right information, and the right advice. It's also down to consumers and buyers to ensure that sort of filters back through, those feelings from the consumers filters back through at farm level. All the change we've been through, 1744, that first agricultural deal we can trace back, all that change we've been through, there's a running theme in banking. It's really simple business. Yes, we can lend you some money. How do you want us to pay us back? And then it becomes a decision on whether we go with that decision to lend money or not. If you're not generating cash, any bank is going to be really struggling to support that business moving forward. So, while we're talking about profitability, here's a great survey. It's AHDB, and I use it as an example because the top 25% all year round calving herds made 12.6 pence per litre more margin than the bottom 25%. Their cost of production was 10.5 pence per litre lower than the bottom third. That's a staggering figure. You stick that very basically on 130, 140 cows, 8,000 litres, million litres of milk a year, 10 pence a litre is about 100 grand. That's quite a stunning figure, really, when you think about it. So, why is that important? Already talked about carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. Where we see high levels of those, we are talking about inefficient operations. It's not all avoidable, we know that, but sometimes some of those emissions are actually inefficiency. So if we've got a farm business that can produce milk at 10 pence a litre less cost than one who produces it at 10% a litre higher, to me, that top 25% is more efficient. They're going to have a smaller carbon footprint. They're going to be utilising more of their assets, more of their slurry perhaps, and have a really efficient farming system. So not only are they in the business of being profitable, they're also probably quite a way down that route of being more sustainable and achieving net zero. So here we are. It's 2020. It hasn't been the year we all thought it might be in the first sort of 8, 9, 10 weeks of the year. Um, and we know there's the only constant is change, as the old phrase goes. We know there's so much coming down the track at us from a policy, from a directional point of view. But is it a brave new dawn? It's probably a little bit over dramatic. Is it a fresh direction? Yeah, absolutely. Are we going to have to start thinking more broadly, more laterally? Are we going to have to start doing more soil sampling? Are we going to have to start using fertilizers, greater efficiency? And by that, I mean sort of slurry farmyard manure, things like that. Yeah, absolutely. Are we going to have to start thinking about soil structure, soil quality, organic matter percentage in soil, so that not only can the soil be very fertile and very positive, but also, talking about catchment management, flood management. The list is endless. What I can tell you is, the quicker we get down the dip of that graph as an industry as a whole and as individuals, and the sooner you start climbing up the other side of investigating what it is your farm business can do to be more efficient, which then will drive lower carbon, which will then make net zero carbon and greenhouse gas far more achievable, the sooner your business is on the front foot in the brave new world. What I will say is, I know I don't look old enough, but I am 51. I've been involved 30 years since I left agricultural college, 35 years since I left school and went to work at home on a small pig farm in Lancashire, and obviously grew up on a pig farm. So I reckon I've got a good 40 years of reasonably sensible farming experience behind me. We've all seen a lot of change over that time. Even if you've only been in the industry 15, 10 years, you'll have seen a lot of change. What I will tell you is I've never been more enthused and more excited about the change ahead, how the UK can embrace that change, and how we can become world leaders in sustainable farming, hitting those net zero carbon targets and greenhouse gas targets, and having a far more sustainable long-term business and industry. Very exciting times. With that, I will leave you with the disclaimer, and it's been great to talk to you. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you do want to discuss it anymore, I'm very easy to find. Thank you.